Welcome all to K-Drama School. I'm your host, Grace Jung, and class is now in session. I have a few announcements to make. So this weekend on November 21st, which is a Friday, 5 p.m., I will be at Hudson Valley Books for Humanity in Ossining, New York. That will be a panel talk between myself and Helen Hyungyung Park, who is an amazing artist and videographer. She is also a teacher and a family therapist, social worker, overall amazing humanitarian and artist. And so she and I will be having a discussion at 5 p.m. Friday, November 21st at Hudson Valley Books for Humanity. Then Saturday, November 22nd, 2 p.m. in Nyack, New York at Big Red Books, I will be giving a talk to discuss K-Drama School, a pop culture inquiry into why we love Korean television. So look forward to that. And then on Monday, December 1st at 7:30 p.m., I will be at Crystal Lake in Brooklyn, New York for a stand-up gig. It's for the Not a Boy, Not a Girl comedy show. Find me on Instagram at Grace Jung Comedy. I will also be posting things at K-Drama School on Instagram, so you can find details there. Of course, you can also visit my website, gracejungcomedy.com and kdramaschool.com for all details on events and future events. And if you want to book me for any talks, for any lectures, any panels, etc., you can email me at info@kdramaschool.com. You guys, it's crazy to say, but this is the 200th episode of K-Drama School. Who knew that this day would come? But the other thing is, this day should have come a little sooner. As you all know, if you've been listening for a while, I would typically post a new episode every Monday, and that has certainly slowed down since last year after I moved to Madison. It's as if my discipline and work ethic and desperation to be in front of the camera and behind the camera has diminished greatly ever since I left Los Angeles. I think I was also dealing with a lot of burnout after leaving LA. I emailed a good friend of mine living out in LA who is a writer, and he asked me, "What do you miss about LA?" And I listed some things like I miss the weather, I miss the ocean, I miss the food, I miss meeting new artists all the time who would crack me up. I miss all the nights of comedy and clowning that I could do at any time during the week, whenever and wherever. I miss that. But I also said I don't miss any of it at the same time. I'm pretty much over it. But I am committed to getting out these episodes that have been in the backlog for a few months now. So last week, my talk with Brienne that just released. If you guys want to go over that show, Virtuous Business, and the history of sex toys in South Korea, you can definitely check out that episode. And my improv game with Brienne is a lot of fun. And there will be other talks coming up soon, like the thing about that chef, yeah, the one with that girl, the Girls' Generation chick, like all these names, all these details, they're just like, they have flown out of my mind. And the reason why is because I'm very tired at the moment. I had quite a weekend, spending an entire day yesterday with my partner's mother. Not that she's tiresome, she's actually a lot of fun. So this exhaustion is actually from just raging out, just having a rager of a party with a retired art teacher. Yeah, it was actually kind of a blast. Visited some spots in Wisconsin that I've never been to before, like the Driftless, which is just rolling hills in Wisconsin, beautiful rolling hills and winding roads. and visiting the Amish store out there where they are selling chia seeds for like $1, like a whole tub of chia seeds for $1.25, a whole bag of pink Himalayan salt for $2. Did you know that the Amish store kicks Whole Food in the ass like a million times over and over again? Did you know that the Amish store makes Air One look like a criminal institution? I mean, you can get organic, good stuff from the Amish for frickin' nothing, okay? And I have to hand it to you. Like, I have a lot of respect for the Amish, the way that they work, their work ethic, how they, sustain their livelihood, and they don't rely on capitalist institutions. And then, of course, there is the other part where you go into an Amish store and then I see a package of cream savers, all right? It was like my favorite candy, cream savers. You know what I mean? It's the lifesavers, but it's got cream and strawberry. There's also the orange flavor, but fuck that. I mean, the strawberry one's so much better. I see a package of cream savers at the Amish store, and I'm like, this shit was discontinued. Why is it at the Amish store? Did they have it since like the early 2000s and they're just selling it here for $2.39? What is going on? So of course I buy it. I buy it because, I haven't had cream savers in like over 10 years. And then I get in the car and I do some research, and turns out, no, cream savers have gone back into the market since 2021 after being discontinued in 2011. So I was just really out of the whole cream savers return news for the last 4 years. So yeah, I bought cream savers at the Amish store along with chia seeds and Himalayan salt. It was quite a weekend for me. Folks, if you haven't gotten my book, K-Drama School, A Pop Culture Inquiry into Why We Love Korean Television, I recommend that you do, okay? Because this book is good. It's so good that an Irish film and television producer reached out to me through my website and just commented on how much he liked the book and how many similarities he sees with Irish national trauma and Korean national trauma. And I gotta hand it to you. I mean, Irish and Korean national trauma comparative studies have been done. They have absolutely been done. And, what I like about that is how different, these cultures are, how far away they are from each other on the globe, and yet they do share this national trauma. I mean, there's so many similarities. How many alcoholics there are among the Irish and among the Koreans. How both nations really lean into religion for a sense of salvation or a sense of groundedness or some kind of spiritual assistance or support, right? And community support. Another interesting thing being, which I mention in my book, K-Drama School, I do talk about how I went to middle school and high school with a whole bunch of Irish Americans in New York. So, yeah, thank you for that email, person who emailed me. It was very, very kind of you, and it also gave me an opportunity to talk about the similarities between Ireland and Korea. One thing I was very proud of when I was corresponding with my friend is I said to him, I was like, I just want to live a life where I write books, I give talks, I give lectures, I travel, I work on my craft, and I live a simple and quiet life. And I realized, like, as I was writing that, I'm already living that life. And if that's not success, then I don't know what else is. But you guys, I have an amazing guest on my show today. Her name is Minju Lee, and she is an assistant professor in the Asian Studies Department at Occidental College in Los Angeles. Minju and I go back to our UCLA days. Minju was a year or two ahead of me. I think 1 year ahead of me. She was in the Women's and Gender Studies department at UCLA, and she was working with, I guess, an anthropologist scholar as her dissertation mentor. And Minju and I were both in a writing group together with one other person who was also Asian American. And the three of us would send one another 5 new pages every single week. And we would send it by, I think the way we did it was we would send it by Friday. Yeah, and send one another five new pages by Friday. And then over the weekend, we would read one another's 5 pages with notes and give them to one another by Monday. And then spend the week writing 5 new pages and send it by Friday. And we did that for like quite a while, several months, maybe a year. And that's how we wrote our dissertations. And I remember reading her dissertation each week and just being like, I can't wait for the next 5 pages. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed reading her dissertation. And if her dissertation was that good, how do you think her book would be? Minju Lee is the author of an amazing new book that just came out from Rutgers University Press called Finding Mr. Perfect. Amazing, sweet, pithy title. That's exactly what you want in a book, academic or not. And it is just a very rich, amazingly researched kind of work. And it blends Asian masculinity studies with Asian American masculinity studies. It takes in Korean nationalism into account. It takes in Orientalism into account. It takes in women and sexuality studies into account. It looks at racial relations and global hierarchies, and it upturns every single presumption that we might have had about Asian masculinity and Asian American masculinity and desirability. It is looking at young women in their 20s who go to Korea in search of finding a boyfriend that they imagine to be just like what they had seen in a K-drama. I mean, already this is a super provocative topic. I mean, her research method was fascinating. She would go and stay at hostels in Seoul and then encounter these women and just perform ethnographic research by dialoguing with them, spending time with them, hanging out with them, asking them questions. And these young women so graciously were open to just talking about these things and offering them up for her book. And I just really, really love this work because it has this handcrafted quality to it. There's heart to it. She's not pathologizing fandom, which is a big issue when it comes to fandom of any kind, this misogynistic history of pathologizing women fans. And it's looking at something that's so unique, and there's a whole world to it, and it's very complex and rich and thick, and it can't be reduced to a singular thought, which is why it is a book. And it's a book that is worth reading. So it was a great joy to talk to Minju, and I am very pleased to now introduce our discussion. Let's get into our talk with Dr. Minju Lee. Yeah, thanks for making the time. It's been so long since I last spoke to you or corresponded with you. How have you been?
All right. I mean, I've been moving around quite a bit, trying to search for the academic job, and finally I returned to LA. But
yeah,
it's been all right. Yeah. How about you?
Yeah. Where have you been?
For me, after graduating from UCLA, I went to Wellesley College in Massachusetts, and then after that, I spent 2 years there, and then I went to Indiana, Bloomington. And spent a year there, and then came back to LA in 2023.
Wow. How was Wellesley? That's such a great school, and it's so beautiful there, that campus.
Yeah, Wellesley was nice. I was a visiting lecturer there. During that time, it was still kind of COVID, so I was teaching in random places, like the chapel turned into classrooms.
Yeah.
But generally, it was fine.
Oh,
nice
that's
experience.
Terrific. Yeah. Wow, Indiana. Yikes. I've I've driven through Indiana, and I have a Korean American friend, a very close and dear Korean American friend who grew up in Indiana as a Korean family. So
Oh.
I do know there is like a population there, but yeah, what was like Bloomington like?
Bloomington is nice. Bloomington is a little bit different from rest of Indiana, I feel like,
Oh,
because
okay.
Bloomington is about an hour away from Indianapolis. So whenever I would like land in Indianapolis and drive down to Bloomington, I'm like, oh, Bloomington is such a like bubble because of the college of being
Yeah.
such a big part of the town, as opposed to the rest of Indiana, which is so different.
Sure, sure.
So
Yeah.
many like, I don't know, Confederate flags, gun shops,
Yep.
etc.
Yep. A lot of corn. Yeah. It's
Corn.
very flat. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Sweet. Sweet. All right. So yeah, I think that's like basically how it is for a lot of like early career academic is just like you're just constantly moving. You're like uprooting all the time, right?
Yeah.
Like when you were like moving from place to place like that though, like did you find yourself like decorating your space at all? Like, or did you just like not care about
Not
furnishing?
decorating, trying to minimize my stuff too, the things that I buy, because I was like, each box is going to cost me way more time and money to move if I have to move again. So
Exactly.
trying to minimize until I could settle down somewhere. And I had to like put a limit in terms of in my own head, like how long can I do this? When am I going to stop if there isn't a permanent position for me?
Yeah.
So yeah, eventually I was like, oh, in 5 years, if I don't get it, I'm going to just look for other things because this is unsustainable. But
Yeah. It
somehow
really
I landed
isn't.
somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Oxy's a great school and, you know, LA is a great city. So, I mean, that's huge. So amazing. Congratulations with that.
Thank you.
And also congratulations on your new book, which is coming out like this week or next week?
Next week, I think, 11th.
On the 11th, 11/11. That's great. Yeah. Good number. It's a lucky number. Terrific. And just so like my listeners know, and I've like mentioned your dissertation now book like on my podcast before.
You
I
also mentioned it in your book, which I've been reading.
Yeah, I mentioned your work in my book. Your like I remember when we were in that writing group together, you were at your last year, I guess, of dissertating, and I was like second to last year dissertating, and like we were a pretty rigorous writing group, I think.
Yep,
like
definitely.
very like Korean style, Asian style, like
Yep.
I think it was 5 pages a week. Was it
5 pages a week. at
5
least,
pages
yeah.
a week, 5 new pages every week, and I just remember like I always looked forward to your 5 pages.
Oh, thank
Because
you.
well, first of all, like, you know, I know that your advisor like comes from anthropology. Like you studied in women's and gender studies department though, right?
Yeah.
Like that was your department. But like your work integrates anthropological methods a lot, and that's something I want to get into and talk to you more about in terms of your methodology. But like the writing, because there's a narrative and there are these subjects and they're so complex and interesting and compelling, I just looked forward to reading your work every week. And it's such a like provocative subject, you know, the subject matter itself. So I guess like my first question would be like, how did you even discover that there was a group of young women from North America, from Western Europe, who were traveling to Korea in the first place for this very reason, for tourism reason, like sex tourism reason, romantic tourism reasons? Like, how did you find that phenomenon out?
I initially was interested in doing research on Hallyu tourism in general, and there has been a lot of work done on like Japanese women who would come because they loved Winter Sonata, or like Chinese group tourists who would come. So I was thinking, oh, along that line, I would just target younger tourists and what they're interested in. So initially I went in thinking, oh, I'm going to look at how they engage with these tourist spaces, like where the television dramas were filmed, maybe how they go to like fan events or stuff like that. But then I realized they do those things, but at the same time, a lot of their time is also spent on Tinder and also on dating and going out to clubs and bars. So I was like, this isn't something that other people have spoken about, and maybe it's only like kind of exclusive to these group of women because of their age as well as their racial identities also, compared to like much older Japanese or Chinese women who have been thoroughly studied before. So I was like, oh, this is new. Maybe I'll just look into this a little bit more, along with how they engage with space and the other celebrities as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's what makes your title so great. Like the title of the book is Finding Mr. Perfect. And it's like, first of all, it's like nice, short, pithy title. Like it's hard to find academic books with a nice, straightforward, short, sweet, pithy title, first of all. Like you don't have like a colon with like all this other stuff in the back.
It doesn't sound too much like a romance novel or anything.
It is a romance novel, isn't it?
I guess it is. Yeah.
It is. And, you know, like, there's nothing wrong with that. People love romance novels. People love, right? And, you know, I think especially, I don't know if you've dealt with this at all, like, or felt this in you while you were writing, like, or developing this into a book and working on it and researching it. But it's like, when it comes to discussing love or feelings, I feel like it's very tricky for academics, but for whatever reason, I mean, it's not whatever reason, there are very concrete reasons why people who do women, gender, sexuality studies are better at this. But like, you know, I don't know, I just look at like Black feminist thinkers like Bell Hooks or Audre Lorde, like they always integrated their subjectivity and their feelings into their work, their research, their academic work. And so I feel like women's and gender studies scholars are better at writing about love and romance. But like, did you feel like, oh, does this count as valid research, or is this legitimate, or did you get any pushback from any other academics while working on this project? Or
yeah, definitely. In terms of like questioning, I still like wonder in my head, even as the book is about to come out, if this is going to be taken as like quote unquote serious academic research, or whether people are going to trivialize it. Because throughout, when I was presenting at conferences or interacting with some of the other people and getting feedback about it, some people would be like, oh, that's just so trivial, and like these are just like phases that the tourists are going through. Why are you focusing on that, would be some of the comments. And then some of the other folks were like, oh, love, interesting, but it seems so personal and not like theoretical enough. So is this legitimate academic work, or is this somebody's diary or something like that? And I was like, I guess it is a good point, but it is something that a lot of tourists are doing, so might as well record it and take their accounts into like consideration and take it a little bit more seriously than being like, oh, it's a phase and they're going to get over it.
Right. And I guess there's also that other argument, the counter argument to saying like, well, so what if it is a phase, you know? A phase is still a part of human living and human reality. And just because it's a phase, just because it's temporary, doesn't mean that it doesn't count, and it doesn't mean that it doesn't matter, right? So yeah, that's very interesting. That you know, you yourself you were feeling that internally, and then there was the external sort of feedback. But no, I mean, I think this is really innovative research. I think it's provocative research. I think it really turns the tables, especially because you talk about Asian masculinity and you talk about Orientalism a lot. And I guess that'll be the segue into my next couple of questions. So like, first, your book talks about, your book has a very interesting commentary about sex and sexuality in relation to restrained masculinity or restrained sexuality for Korean men. So like, what is it about that is so attractive to these tourists? And like, can you elaborate more on this concept of restrained sexuality with Korean masculinity?
Yeah, definitely. So with the restraint, I talk about it in multiple aspects. On one level, there is some form of restraint in the Korean television drama depictions of them because of like censorship and Korean media not being allowed to portray overt sexuality too much. Nowadays, it has changed a little bit because of Netflix, as you talk about in your book as well. But generally speaking, because I was doing research a little bit before like all the Netflix dramas were coming out and stuff like that, most of the tourists that I was interviewing were consuming these like more mainstream ones that still had restrained masculinity in terms of how they were staring off into the woman's faces instead of like doing other kinds of more physical things.
Right.
So because of that, and without knowing like all the censorship and cultural nuances that go into portraying that kind of masculinity, some of the women who I interviewed would come in being like, oh, that must be somewhat representative of the masculinity in real life, and therefore I want that. And the way that I understood why they wanted it was because a lot of them were too tired of hypersexual masculinity in whichever home countries they came from. Right. A lot of them had stories about being like burned by all these like not evil, I guess, like toxic masculine men in their home countries and in the dating culture, everyone who seemed to be seeking sex all day every day, and they were just like, that is like, I'm too tired of this. I want some kind of other masculinity that exists in this world that looks at me as more than just a like sexual being. So that kind of seemed to motivate a lot of the women, the stories and the experiences that they had back in their home country with the supposedly hypersexual men.
Right. Yeah, and like, again, this kind of goes back to the feedback that you've been receiving, the feedback that trivializes this kind of research, right? Because if we go back to like, well, what is the feminist like productive research that's being done here, right? You're capturing women's direct experiences. You know, I mean, they're hetero women, they're cis women, they are all saying like their feedback of their experience in this hetero society is like, the culture is too hypersexualized. It is burdensome. It's actually feels violating to them, or uncomfortable to them, or disgusting to them, or painful to them, right? And I feel like capturing that kind of feedback and that kind of voice, and then documenting that journey of them going out to look for something that is different, that might meet their needs in terms of love, right? Which is a very essential basic quality in every single human individual, and therefore there's nothing to trivialize about it. It's actually the basic point of existing in this world. Which is something academics just can't do, right? Like they can't get out of the thinking brain. They don't know how to access their hearts, and that's why academic writing is generally very boring, which is very different from your book, which integrates that human voice and the women's direct experiences, their direct response to the hegemonic culture, so to speak, right?
Definitely. Some of the stories that they were telling were so like powerful and riveting in a way, of like the experiences they would have at bars. Even in Korea, when they would go to bars, they would kind of compare and contrast these kind of foreign masculinity with Korean masculinity, being like, oh, these foreign tourist men would just grind up on me, and it was the Korean guy who was protecting me and stuff like that. So of course there's like a certain like stereotype that they're using to kind of understand Korean masculinity and foreign masculinity in that context. But still, I still like understood where they were coming from to a certain extent, that I wasn't like, oh, they're being so like Orientalist all the time, every time, because there was definitely a gendered perspective to their motivations.
Yeah. And it's interesting how that, like, you keep talking about this binary throughout, right? Like the way, like, or I guess that comes from this term that you're using, especially in your introduction and throughout some of your chapters, the tourist gaze, quote unquote tourist gaze. Like, can you elaborate more on that and how that fits into that dichotomy of like, you know, Western men versus Korean men, and then the more complicated areas that your book goes into where that binary doesn't quite hold up?
So with the tourist gaze by John Urey, I think is his name, the tourist theory scholar, he coined the term, and generally I kind of use it derived from his theory to say, oh, tourists oftentimes want to seek authenticity in their experiences as tourists because they paid so much money and they put so much time into going to whichever place they went to that they want something new and quote-unquote authentic that they cannot experience in their home countries. But the pitfalls of looking constantly for authenticity is that you're trying to find these differences from your home culture or home country to the cultures or the people that are residing in these tourist spaces, even though there may be even much more similarity between the two as opposed to there being too much differences. So highlighting those differences mean that ultimately speaking, some of the tourists were experiencing Korean masculinity as so exotic and different, even though they may have somewhat been similar to some of the men that they experienced back home. Because sometimes when I was hearing these women after they went out on dates and them talk about their experiences, not all of the Korean men were this idyllic, romantic, gentlemanly people. Of course, there were like great men, it seemed like, whom I also saw and whom I heard from these women. But at the same time, some of the men were just like, I would have to ask them, like, what is the difference between these Korean men and the men back home? For instance, there was one example where one of the women was talking about a guy who was very hypersexual and approaching her in a bar in her home country. And she would talk about how her brothers would teach her how to fight that physically, like punch them in the face so that she doesn't get taken advantage of by these men back home. But then something similar happened to her at a bar in Korea, and she was like, oh, that's nothing, like I don't take it seriously. And I was like, what is the difference between what you experienced back in your home country and the Korean men who just like did things to you that you didn't necessarily want, and why didn't you punch him in the same way that you said you would have done if it was the men back in your home country? So that was some of the like nuances there in terms of even if some of the women experienced the Korean men and the different kind of masculinities that they had, not all of which were this utopic kind of masculinity, they would kind of sometimes brush that away, saying, oh, that's like one-off instance, or that's like not as like significant or troubling as the experience I had back home. So that I found pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like that really is fascinating though, isn't it? And it says a lot about just like an individual and I think everybody kind of lives their world in this way or navigates the world in this way. Like this tourist gaze, which is a fascinating concept, and like your application of it is so dynamic and interesting. But it basically comes from like whatever my projection is or my assumptions are, right? I'm going to make that fit into these categories of authentic or culturally whatever, right? Like culturally real or but it's like at the end of the day, like I as the individual decide that, right? Like your subject was doing. I remember reading like, I mean, there was this one subject who like, I guess she was seeing a Korean guy, and he kept pressuring her to have sex, and she kept saying no because she was out more for like that romantic, slow kind of let's build towards something real, right? Like with mutual respect, getting to know each other. But this randy Korean fellow was just really pressuring her. Like, you know, he was just being like, I mean, he was objectifying her, right? And you also do have commentary about that, the way Korean men, those locals, would like objectify and have applied their own assumptions and fantasies and projections onto white women as well, right? So there's like a very interesting sort of dance with these assumptions that both genders make, right?
Assumptions and desires from both sides, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so I do remember asking you this like when we were both still in school, but like I'd like for you to talk about it a little more because we're gonna go into your methodology now. I mean, like tell me about your research. Like how would you classify your mode of methodology or your method of research? And like, I mean, you write about like the hostile experience so interestingly, right? Like, and it is taxing. I mean, you know, like especially because your family had a home, like they have a home in Seoul, right? Like you could have been in the comfort of your home, but you chose deliberately to do this as part of your research. So tell me about that whole experience and how you built towards towards this particular methodology that you chose?
Yeah, definitely. So the part that we have been talking mostly about, I would categorize as ethnography. I used other methods in the book as well. For instance, going into like online fan spaces and examining that and analyzing the Korean media text as well. But in terms of the ethnography itself, I lived in, as you mentioned, the hostels that were frequented by the tourists. And because it was like a hostel setting, where there were dormitories, where there were like 6 or 8 people in a room in bunk beds together, it was inevitable that the people that I was going to interview were going to be pretty young. It wasn't like 40-year-old and 50-year-olds are going to stay in that environment when they had the means to book a hotel room. So I decided that I was going to stay in one of those dormitory rooms as opposed to like a single occupancy room, because that got me more access to the individuals, and it was more of a social setting where people were constantly going in and out. So I stayed in those dormitory rooms, and then in those settings or in the public like rest areas and stuff like that in the living rooms, I would just approach people, talk to them about my research and what my intention of writing a book, publishing, and ask them what their motivations were for coming to Korea. And if it was mostly related to Korean pop culture, then I would ask them a little bit more detail about themselves, and then ask them if they would be interested in participating in the research. Oftentimes, they were very helpful because they were interested in talking to me, and I was also of some help to some of them in terms of like being able to translate or help them in situations where they could not communicate with other Korean men or people in general. And also, and then some of them would also help me give access to me going to their tourist locations, doing tourist activities with them. So it would be like partly interviews, but also partly going out to bars or clubs with them, which was also fun. But I was a little bit older than a lot of the people who I was interviewing, so that had to stop after like halfway through, because my body just could not take staying up until like 3 a.m. and stuff like that. So after a while, after I realized this is unsustainable for my own health, I just let them go by themselves after a few months, and then I would interview people after they came back in the morning, being like, how was your night and how was your experience? What did you do the day before, etc.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a very unique way, but I mean, it's also like a very smart way to gain access, right? I mean, I'm glad that you mentioned that a lot of them were like pretty open to talking about their experiences and their motive and their intent for being there. Like, it sounds like they were pretty open about it. It's like
some of them were very like appointed about what they want to be included in the book as well, because some of them would be talking about like these from my perspective, like somewhat personal or like very sensitive topics, and they would turn to me and be like, oh, this should be in your book for sure, because this is so interesting conversation. So they were kind of like were interested in talking to me, maybe because they realized that I was also like a Korean drama fan, and I wasn't there to like criticize or judge them for every behavior that they were doing necessarily.
I think that is a big deal, right? Like, so okay, then I actually did want to ask you this, like, what is your relationship to Korean television and Korean dramas? Like, tell me a little bit about your background, like where you grew up, and where you grew up in Korea, where you grew up here, if at all, like in the US, and like how your relationship to television evolved like over the years.
Yeah, definitely. So I grew up going back and forth between Korea and the US throughout most of my life. So I lived about half of my life back and forth in Korea and another half in the US. And all throughout the process, one of the consistent factors was my love for Korean television dramas. So I remember distinctly when I was leaving Korea in elementary school to come to live in Michigan, Hojun, this Korean historical drama that was very famous about the traditional medicine doctor, was playing. And I had to leave Korea with just like 5 episodes remaining or something like that.
Boy.
And I was like, oh no, like I want to see how it ends.
Yeah.
But thankfully in Michigan, when I arrived, they had a little Korean grocery store. And similar to your experience that you talk about in your book, they also like rented videos a few weeks after the episode played in Korea. So I would just wait in the grocery store while my mom was shopping and ask them, oh, did the Hejun episode 60 whatever come out yet? And then I would immediately get it and watch it. So I was able to finish the entirety of it. After that, I returned to Korea after living 2 years in Michigan, and then I was able to like consume again on regular television that was streaming all day, every day. Once I returned back into the US for college, it was a little bit of a different environment because at that time Netflix was a thing now, and Rakuten Viki and Drama Fever was also a thing. So I would be able to consume all these Korean media even when I was living in Williamstown in the middle of nowhere, Massachusetts, in the middle of the mountains. So it was like a new experience. I was still able to gain access to all these new television, which I loved. And that kind of love persisted. I still watch Korean television dramas very frequently. I have I have expanded on to consuming Chinese dramas also, which are very interesting nowadays. So I just generally love dramas.
Yeah. I mean, well, first of all, Michigan, goodness, you were out in the Midwest, so cold. I mean, like Hejun was an amazing show.
That
show was incredible. Like everybody talks about Daejanggeum, but it's like no. Like, have you seen Hejun? Like that show was amazing. That actor, like rest in peace, amazing. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that. And I think that kind of like everybody's experienced this. Like when shows are kind of like at their end, their final few episodes, like you gotta see them. It's like you've been building towards this all this time, especially a show like Hejun. There were so many episodes of that. And it's like you were very invested, dozens and dozens of episodes in. And it's like to leave the last 5, like that's like extreme blue balling in terms of like television experience. And also that lag, right? Like especially if you're living abroad outside of Korea, there's that latency period, like where you gotta wait a little bit in order to get what you want to experience, get what you want to see, right? That satisfaction feeling. And nowadays with streaming, it's like that lag is so much shorter, if any, like especially with Netflix and what have you. And like even On Demand Korea, like that other website, like my mom told me about that site like 10 years ago, but she was like, oh, like for this show, I would only have to wait 24 hours and then whatever aired in Korea would be streaming here within 24 hours. And I was like, wow, technology really is something else. Like, with those videotapes, we had to wait weeks, we really had to wait a long time. Like if we had friends in Korea, they already saw it all. They would give away spoilers, like if you went online.
You had to wait if you weren't fast enough. If somebody took it, there weren't like multiple copies, so you have to wait a few more days.
Yeah. That would be the worst. It's like, no, this is a popular show. You need to record more. Like, you can't, don't tell me you ran out of tapes. Like, please. So that lag period. And it's something that like diaspora Koreans would know about, right? So like, I think that in and of itself is like part of Korean television history too, like although extended in a way, right? Okay, that's terrific. You talk about these young tourists. They're mostly from like Western Europe, North America, and like you also talk about like the economic comparisons, right, in terms of like these nations and what have you. And you do a very interesting thing in your introduction where you're kind of like turning the tables on some of the scholarship that's been done from like that Orientalist gaze or that Orientalist perception projected from Western scholarship, where they're kind of looking at like, oh, any of these other nations, other capital O, like other meaning non-white nations, where tourists would go from a white nation to a non-white nation, and then there's kind of this like look of, I don't want to say condescend, but that is kind of what it is, like this condescending sort of viewpoint. And then you kind of argue against that and say, well, actually, South Korea is a top economy in the world at this, current time. In the last like 15, 20 years, it's been a top economy for a while. And these tourists that you speak to, these young women, they don't look at South Korea as this nation to sort of arrive at, to look down upon and get some or commit to some kind of exploitative role in any which way. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of like sex tourism scholarship and these kind of tourism scholarship, I noticed, look at the travel from the West to the non-West, as you mentioned, and how the dynamics are always sort of hierarchical because the tourists have much more money than the local people. And the tourists are there to like kind of buy some of the sex workers who are actually sex workers as opposed to everyday people who have jobs who happen to like interact with the tourists. So there is definitely these kind of power dynamics there and the like hierarchy that exists. But then that didn't seem to apply to the interaction between the tourists that I was observing and interviewing and the Korean men, because these Korean men were not there to cater to the tourist desires necessarily. They were college students, they had other jobs, and it just happened to be that they either matched on Tinder or they met at a club, and that's how they kind of interacted. So it wasn't like there was money involved. More oftentimes I would see the Korean men, because they were trying to be gentlemanly or because they had their own agendas, buying or treating the woman to dates and giving like buying them alcohol or treating them to dinner or something like that, as opposed to the stereotypical way of thinking where the tourists had much more money and would be gifting all these local people things in order to for them to kind of cater to their sexual desires. So that was interesting to me because it kind of went against this idea that, oh, there's always a hierarchy between the tourist and the local people, and that the local people always are catering to the tourist desires. For the Korean men, they were not necessarily catering. If they were catering to the desires for the woman to see these kind of non-sexual romantic masculinity, then it was like sort of an act that they were putting on consciously aware that through that kind of an act, they could perceive, like, fulfill their own agenda for having sex with foreign women. So that was like a interesting dynamic to examine.
That's so fascinating because, like, I mean, the majority of sex tourism research would probably fall under like men from the West going to these other countries to sleep with ethnic women who are of like a lower economic status, right? That is not to say, and you mentioned this again in your book, and I've also just heard about it or witnessed it, but like if you go to places like, you know, there are countries in Africa where white women with money would go and, you know, or the Caribbean, right? Like, again, that comes from this white projection, this white fantasy, this white othering of, right, like an essentializing of these other races and that gender, right? And it's like, oh, I'm gonna go there and like hook up with some guy and it's gonna be like this. So I mean, that research also exists, and there are like films and stuff about it too. That's really fascinating, right? But and I also heard this, there's also a group of Japanese women with money who would travel to countries in Africa to sleep with.
Really?
Yeah, like with local men in order to, you know, get some kind of sexual satisfaction or whatever.
Interesting.
Really fascinating. So it's not just white women. It's just like, I mean, women of a certain social economic status that would go and pursue these things. But majority of the research would be men going to other nations, right? And South Korea also has this similar phenomenon with like Korean businessmen or Korean male professionals who have a certain economic status. They would go to like the Philippines or, you know, Vietnam or whatever.
Sorry.
No, please go ahead.
In the news this morning, Korean news, like Cambodian or some Korean government in Cambodia asking Korean men to not engage in sex work in Cambodia because it was becoming too much of a problem. So it is definitely a thing. Korean men going to Southeast Asia in particular, which is a little bit more accessible via flight and in terms of financially speaking, and engaging in the sex work industry, buying or having sex with sex workers, sometimes apparently underage, which is a huge problem. So
I see. So that's the issue. Yeah. I mean, of course, like we see this in Korean cinema too. That Lee Jae-young movie, Podcast Lady, like it sort of starts out with, right, like a woman, I think she's from the Philippines, but, you know, like the doctor had impregnated her and they have a son together, but the doctor also has a family like in Korea, and he was just kind of ignoring his role and his duties as a father, right? So like this is definitely a phenomenon in South Korea as well. So you're entering this very complex web, but also leaning more heavily towards like the researchers primarily men doing this, and you're kind of tipping that and going like, I'm going to look at women doing this, but we're not looking at women with like baller money. We're not looking at retired women. We're not looking at like yuppie women. We're looking at like young women, college, like early stages in their like adult lives. They don't have money because they're staying at hostels, and they're like, they're kind of they're fitting themselves into that Cinderella role very interestingly, right? Because like all the K-drama narratives have that, you know, young orphan girl beginning. It's a trope. And then she meets that rich guy who changes her life. And it's like these young women, it's not just about romance. It's also about like experiencing that whole K-drama experience, like what can I get from that narrative that I've seen, like how can I fulfill that fantasy and max out, and they are kind of getting that through the local men, as you mentioned, right?
Definitely. Some of them would definitely say something along the lines of, traveling to Korea and meeting and doing all of these activities in Korea is like living in my own Korean television drama. And I was like, that's interesting. Like the entire experience is kind of interpreted through what the tropes they saw in Korean television dramas, as opposed to it being dissociated from each other. But at the same time, they aren't alone in doing that. There would be like some Koreans who would like come to the US and be like, oh, where's like the High School Musical kind of scene happening or stuff like that. So it is like all like a universal experience to a certain extent. The question is, to what extent are you going to like say it out loud or like practice what you desire, as opposed to like just thinking in your head.
Right. And like in like I guess your concluding chapter or one of your later chapters, you also talk about like the men's responses to these K-dramas and the expectations that are set up, right? Like can you talk more about like the response from local men to these shows?
I think the response at the time that I was researching was still like shock at the fact that they were somehow like desirable all of a sudden to these tourists, because they are aware of like Hollywood stereotypes of Asian men as like non-sexual, sexually deviant and undesirable romantically speaking. So that was the assumption that a lot of them still had, which was why there was like dissociative moments where I would clearly see that they were invited to the tourist birthday parties or like night out because the tourists were interested in them. But they themselves, when I was talking to these Korean men, were like, oh, we're not that popular. And I would tell them, what are you talking about? You're popular. That's exactly why you're here among all these tourists being invited to their night out. So at that time, there was that kind of still kind of dissociation going on for a lot of men. Some of the men seem to catch on a bit earlier, being like, oh, this is the type that the women are looking for. This is exactly what I'm going to provide because I also have an agenda of being interested in having a relationship or sexual relation with a foreign woman. So different degrees of understanding what positionality they have now in the global dating scene.
It's so fascinating how rom-coms like serve society in a way. Like the role of rom-com in like in society. I think Reese Witherspoon had said this recently. It was either Reese Witherspoon or some other like blonde chick who is in a lot of rom-coms, like you know, Hollywood film rom-coms. But they were basically saying like, because of the decline of rom-coms lately, they were concerned that like men just don't know how to behave. You know?
Oh, interesting point.
So like she was sort of giving rom-com like a status of like this prescriptive power it has in a like giving it a social role, a function in our world. And it's like and I actually get this from my partner too. He'll mention it sometimes. Like he'll be like I don't understand like some of my guy friends when they complain about like, you know, their partners and she's mad and like he doesn't know what to do. And he's like and he literally said, he was like, all the rom-coms I've seen, like the way to remedy that situation is pretty simple. He's like, you just have to hug her for a really long time, you know? You just have to like really be present with her for a really long time. And I was like, that's not wrong. Like I can't argue with that, you know? Definitely. Like all the women that you mentioned, and you know, and the K-dramas that you mentioned, the scenes, the particular scenes that like women get like the feels around. It's like when guys are giving her undivided attention, right?
Definitely.
Just looking at her, being fully present, right? Holding her, but not trying to bone her, right? Nope. Just like very much being present with her. And like all the like, so anyway, I just felt like that commentary was so interesting from that celebrity, and how it kind of like factored it does kind of have a dialogue with your book too, that prescriptive power.
Definitely. That sounds so interesting, because I haven't thought about the prescriptive power of rom-coms, but now that you speak of it, I think there definitely is a thing, because one of the scenes I mentioned in the book is from Descendants of the Sun, where Song Joong-ki and Song Hye-kyo characters kind of meet for the first time after an earthquake occurs. And the first thing that people would assume they would do is like run over to each other and hug or kiss or whatever, but that's not what happens. He like stares at her from the distance, and the first thing that he does is tie her shoelaces, which is like so endearing in some ways, because in that moment where they were looking from each other with passion, like that is what he noticed. He didn't want her to trip over because of the like loose shoelaces, so that's what he takes care of first. So I feel like that kind of like touching deeds and like caring things that people, the male protagonists, do definitely would have some effect on like everyday life behaviors and the dating scene too.
It's like you know, that moment, it's such a small moment, right? But he's bending down and he's doing there's an action involved, and it's impacting her, and it's like it says so much, right? There's a poignancy to it. It's very poetic and powerful. Like, I don't want her to trip and fall. I want her to be safe. Like, there's a caretaking kind of communication involved in that very simple action, right? Which is the power of screens, like the power of television, the power of movies. Like, I get to see what's being said in all these different levels. But like I guess this prescriptive power of K-dramas was just, rom-coms was just coming to my head, like when your male subject said like, oh, now I know what to do in order to satisfy a woman, or you know, be on good terms with her, right? Because K-dramas are, and you and I have talked about this at one point, like they're mostly women by women, aren't they?
Definitely.
And I read like one dissertation, and there was one journal article written from like a communication studies standpoint, but like a lot of these women, they're writing their fantasies, you know, like you and I both know, because we've lived in Korea, we have Korean male family members. We both know, like, when it comes to Korean masculinity, they don't have a good reputation among hetero women, or among women in general. Like, Korean masculinity doesn't have safety labeled to it, or respect or equity attached to it at all, right? And then it's like, well, with these tourists, they're bringing in a whole nother mentality because of these Korean women who had written these fantasies and produced these screen objects. Anything to say to that?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like I read some of the writers' interviews that are in the archives in the Korean television drama, or Korean Television Writers Association archive. And some of the women they had different motivations. I mean, all of them were similar in the sense that they were saying, oh, these are the types of masculinity we want to see or believe that we want to see in real life. But some of them were saying, oh, these are masculinities that I've never experienced, but I want them and that kind of love to exist. So, which is why I'm like making it into existence through my television drama that I can write about. For some other people, like, I'm blanking on her name, but the person who wrote The Guardian and The Descendants of the Sun.
Kim Eun-suk?
Oh, yeah. She is a little bit different because she talks about how her inspirations are brothers who are so sweet in her life. Like, there's a famous story in Korea where when they were all growing up, the brothers, when they saw that it was raining and there was one umbrella left because they were not very wealthy, they would just all run out because they wanted her to have the umbrella. And they were okay with it just being soaked because they cared about her. So she was like, oh, what are all these women talking about, the other authors? Because I have these kind of sweet men in my life. Like the men that I write about, people talk about the guy in Descendants of the Sun or The Guardian being so unrealistic, but they're very realistic to me because my brothers are like that. So that kind of idea also, regardless of what their motivations are, it seems like there is like a certain ideal that they have that they project onto the Korean television drama male heroes that influence a lot of the viewers as well, regardless of whether they're Korean or global audience.
Yeah, and I think that goes to maybe this idea about aspiration in television, right? Like television is it's an apparatus of the nation, and television from the broadcaster's perspective or from a public broadcaster's perspective, where you have like government influence and there's a board and there are all these, I mean, they're usually like, you know, middle-aged Korean men who are making these decisions, but they're really trying to shape the nation through television. And so whatever airs or gets broadcast, like they are premeditated, or they get this check of approval, right? The sign off, right? On the one hand, we have like the power of K-dramas, especially rom-coms, and how popular they are. So it's like this globalized commodity for South Korea. We have that. But on the other end of the spectrum, it's like, how do these television shows idealize each gender, or idealize who like an upright citizen is, or right? Like even, you know, going back, I mean, you talk about melodrama in your book, like melodrama definitely does that, right? I mean, do you think these shows, I mean, these K-dramas that you're looking at, these rom-coms, and the way that your subjects are kind of navigating these worlds, do you see that like ideal aspiration, like at all, like having a role in that kind of discourse? Like
ideal aspiration in terms of how the Korean government kind of
how the maybe that could be a question, like how does the Korean government maybe use romantic comedies in order to like construct an idealized citizenship, or maybe even just among like local citizens, like do they look at these K-dramas and say like, oh yeah, this is a like, I would aspire to be like this kind of person, or do they just completely reject it? Or I mean, maybe it's more diverse than that, but yeah, I mean, any thoughts on that, or anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, that's interesting to think about. I feel like to a certain extent Korean dramas reflect the reality, but also some of them could be like out there in terms of suggesting how people could be. Because as you also mentioned in your book, I've noticed there is a little bit of a change in terms of how women are portrayed in the dramas. If you think back to like the even Hojun or the 1990s dramas, women were not that active. They were somewhat like, I guess passive is too extreme of a term, but somewhat traditional in the sense of they were how they were acting, like being somewhat subservient to the male character. But nowadays, the WWW, the drama that you mentioned also, the women are so out there, sometimes one would argue there's a gender reversal. So by looking at it, I feel like even though that is not representative of the entire Korean society and the workplace nowadays, some women would think like, oh, that kind of empowered woman is something that I would want to be, or some of the men would potentially look at it and be like, oh, that doesn't seem like such a bad world necessarily for women to be CEOs and the bosses kind of dictating what the society should do. So so if it's like a Korean drama that isn't
I mean, I would like Search WW to me. It didn't feel like a rom-com, like a traditional rom-com. It felt more like like a romance among these three women. It felt more
That is
like a
true, yeah.
lesbian drama. And I'm seeing more and more K-dramas that feel more like lesbian dramas, you know.
Yeah.
Like there are men around, you know, nobody is like out as a lesbian, but it's like no, these men are very secondary,
Definitely.
very much like, you know, second thought. Like the women and their relationships are the one that's primary, you know.
Yeah. Did you watch the 장나라 drama that focuses on law firm?
No, I tried watching the pilot and then I stopped. But why? Is there a lesbian subtext in that one?
I feel like that also focuses on her relationship with Nam Ji-hyun, who is like another lawyer. And the men do exist, men who fall in love with both of the characters, but it's much more focused on those two women and their support with each other, them kind of competing against each other to be better lawyers and stuff like that. So I definitely agree with you. There seemed to be much more of a drama focused on two woman leads or multiple woman leads who kind of dictate the story and get the story forward, as opposed to the men who seem to be just around for moral support or whatever.
Yeah, there's a definite queering that is happening at the moment that is actually being romanticized even more, more so than like just the typical hetero sort of narratives. Those hetero narratives, like, I feel like they're even I don't know if you've seen that one, the one with the genie, like Kim Woo-bin is in it.
Oh, I haven't watched it yet.
Bae Su-ji is in it. It's like it just needs, and I think that's a Kim Un-suk drama.
Yeah,
so, hence the madness. It's very crazy and wacky. Kim Un-suk, like ever since she started working with Netflix, she's just been getting more and more out there and wacky. Like it's quite interesting. But like these relationships, like they're just hard to believe, you know. They're not very like grounded in a reality at all, because it's a fantasy. This is the fantasy that we're looking at. But then when it comes to like women and their narratives, there's so many more of them, and they're very grounded in like day-to-day realities that are like easy to kind of relate to. It's like, oh, like they have a job, like this is, they're not rubbing a magic lamp and flying off somewhere. You know, it's like very grounded in reality, and those kinds of relationship dynamics seem believable, and they're typically between women and women, which is such a fascinating trend that I'm noting lately. I actually did present an article about that at the SEMS conference about like queer women and K-dramas, and how like it's very marginal, but also kind of coming into the center more and more. But okay, I guess my last question is, how do you redefine Orientalism through this book, through in the context of South Korea and its relation to other countries and television?
Yeah, I would define Orientalism as still pervasive. It's not as if, despite all the efforts and the trying that a lot of the tourists did, or the claims that they made that they were subverting Orientalism, or the efforts by Korean government or the Korean men that Orientalism no longer exists. It still exists at the end of the book is my conclusion, but it is a little bit different from how it originally took shape, Orientalism. It's not as if Asian men, in particular Korean men, are perceived in the exact same way that Orientalism used to perceive them, as like very marginalized individuals, sexually deviant, non-sexual, etc. They're more of a interesting stereotype, quote-unquote positive stereotype that is put on the Korean men. It's still bad because there is stereotypes are all sort of negative. They're pinning people into certain categories without considering all the nuances of their identities and individualism. But at the same time, the discourses surrounding them are somewhat different in terms of thinking about Asian men, Korean men as more desirable, and some of the Korean government personality as well as Korean men being aware of that and potentially trying to think of ways to use it to their benefit as opposed to being just passive subjects of Orientalism.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good answer. And just talking about the Korean government and how they use this, it's like, I mean, South Korea's, we know the truth. South Korea is notoriously sexist, and they don't treat women well at all. You know, like we've all experienced it and seen it. It's on the news all the time. So like it's really fascinating how this like the power of K-dramas and rom-coms, like really like what kind of influence it has for the global audience who are, you know, not locals, and like what it does, that sort of self-projection. Again, like it's a self-projected image that perhaps South Korea itself is aspiring towards through government levels or patriarchal kind of levels, but it's like not quite there yet. But in the meantime, there are these white women who do wish and want and believe for that to be true, which is really interesting. Okay, before we wrap up, let me just ask you, like what K-dramas are you watching lately that you're really into, or what have you finished
Very
lately?
exciting question. I recently, nowadays I'm watching this Chinese drama on Netflix about like two guys who are in a bromance, but before that, the most recent Korean drama I watched was called Twinkle Twinkle Watermelon, I think. Did you watch it?
I don't know this one.
It's
Who's
on
in
Rakuten Viki, among all the other places, and I highly recommend it because one of the in the beginning, one of the protagonists is deaf, and the way that they kind of portray the deaf character and the people surrounding her, it isn't as like ableist as like other kind of dramas or like normative ways of Korea speaking about disability. It's so like refreshing and empowering, and the acting is good, and they aren't focused on like curing her or making her normal, quote unquote, anything like that. They kind of embrace her and value her for who she is and uplift her in a way. And spoil a little bit of a spoiler, but there are more deaf characters who appear at the end also. So it's not like, oh, everyone is becoming like able-bodied, etc.
Right.
It's more so about, it's very different. And I kind of cried while I was looking at it, so highly recommend.
Okay, yeah, that's a good one. Thank you.
What do you watch nowadays?
Well, I finished watching, what is it, You and Nobody Else? The one with Kim Go-eun and that other chick. It's like the two
that one on Netflix?
Yeah, that I very rarely binge K-dramas these days, but that one I couldn't like help but binge. It was just the pathos was so intense. Like I was like, they have my undivided attention. Like, let's go. That was really interesting. I was watching the Genie show, and it's like entertaining, but I didn't finish it yet. Like I went to George Washington University last week, and there was a podcaster there. I forget she does a K-drama podcast, but she's Arab American, and she was like criticizing that show for being very like I don't know, culturally insensitive when it comes to like that kind of narrative. And I was like, oh, fascinating. And then there was another scholar present, Stephanie No, Stephanie Hyunjung No.
Yeah, the name sounds familiar.
Yeah, Hyunjung Stephanie No. She worked as a producer in Korea for many years before she got her PhD. But she was commenting that these K-dramas that are globalized, they are globalized for a reason. It's really to recoup expenses, or it's to it's like, so in order for them to like meet that globalized need, they have like, or that cost, they have to make it worldwide, you know, accessible. And South Korea, again, they're very money driven. Like these broadcasters are very, or production companies are very money driven. So they're trying to appeal to like the Arab, you know, locals, you know, because you know, Arab countries, like they are very wealthy, you know, there are many people with money out there. So it's like the show is like really trying to hail those kinds of audiences and falling very short for it, in the case with this one person who critiqued it from a Muslim American perspective. So I was like, okay, that's really fascinating. But I mean, I was just watching it more like, I mean, Kim Woo-bin is in it. He's not my type, but he's okay. He's a good actor. And then Bae Soo-ji, I love her, so that's why I'm watching it. So like, it's really the star power for me. Like Kim Eun-suk always has star power.
I heard some like production drama surrounding the drama. Like in the beginning, there was like a new, different director, and then they had a falling out with Kim Won-suk. So like halfway through, they employed a different director. So the style changed according to what I heard. But
fascinating. Yeah. That's wild. Yeah, I mean, Kim Won-suk, I mean, she's a showrunner. She has showrunner status at this point, and like, whatever, you know, she gets to make calls like that. Why not? You know, like friggin' Korean directors, I'm sure they fire actresses like without thinking twice about it. You know,
Definitely.
like we've definitely seen that with some shows. I was like watching that show with Ko Hyun-jung, and all of a sudden she was gone, and then there was another actress like playing her role.
Because she had like a falling out with the production crew. Director,
It's like they would take extreme measures like that. So it's like, well, let Kim Won-suk make that call. I don't care. I don't think her shows are that great anymore, but I don't care. Like she gets to make that judgment call. The show that I loved that like I did, it's like in the back burner. It's gonna come out once all of these episodes of my podcast come out. But like the show I really loved was Virtuous Business. About like, what's
the Korean name for it? Do you know?
I forget, but it's like it's about like women in the, I guess, 80s or early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. They're selling sex toys, and it's like a pyramid scheme among ajummas, and they're in like a very rural area, and like they're dealing with all kinds of pushback for doing this. Have you heard about this?
I think I saw like a little bit of it on Netflix. I haven't watched it, but it looked definitely interesting, so I'm planning on watching it.
It is on Netflix. Like just from like a cultural standpoint, like me, like just being interested in that kind of weirdness, and then when it comes to Korean television, like women's sexuality has been so repressed on television for so long that any kind of Korean TV show where women's sexuality is like at the forefront, or it's like it gets attention, I'm like, I'm about this, I want to know more, and like let's get into it. And it was like, it's a short TV I think 12 episodes or 10 episodes, like very simple, like nothing crazy, but I was like, oh my god, look at these women just like, you know, taking control of their sexuality and their pleasure, and like, and also getting over that weirdness. Like all of them deal with it. They all deal with the weirdness. It's like, why am I so repressed? Like, why am I so afraid? Why am I not? You know, they all deal with that. And I was like, this show is super progressive. Like, I was all about it. So
good to know. That's what I'll watch after I finish this Chinese drama then.
Yeah, and I would like to hear what you have to say about it. If you want to like co-write a paper about like women's sexuality and television, like about pleasure, like what is it? Reappropriating pleasure, or like reclamation, reclaiming pleasure as a woman, and K-drama is like, oh my god, I'm all about that right now. Because like, you know, I don't know if you've dealt with, I'm sure you've seen a lot of this, but it's like your book, again, it's refreshing and different compared to the other Korean media studies works, because they dwell on trauma, like national trauma. They dwell on you know, sexism and patriarchy, and you know, your book also handles it, but it's like really trying to do something different. It's like, where is the empowerment that women receive while getting into these kinds of experiences, right? So yeah, I think that's important, you know, because to even out the playing field and acknowledge the broader picture, rather than just saying, oh yeah, Korea's really sexist and all women are repressed. It's like, not quite. Like, it's a lot more complicated than that. So thank you so much for coming on and talking about your book. It's very exciting, coming out on 11/11. And I think I'm really excited for the work to just even be out there, so like scholars like myself can also work with it. And yeah, like, congratulations.
Thank you. Congrats to you also for your book.
Oh, thank you.